And good afternoon, all. I'm Wayne Lutters. I am co-director for the Social Data Science Center here at the University of Maryland. Welcome to our Social Data Science Center Seed Grant Series. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the SoDa website next week. We will have time for questions at the end of the presentations. Please use the Q&A feature at any time during the symposium to write in your questions. I will help moderate them at the end. If you would like the opportunity to ask your question live, please make a note of that, and you'll be called on and unmuted during the Q&A portion. Let me introduce our speakers today. We are really thrilled to have Giovanni Luca Ciampaglia, who's an assistant professor here in the College of Information Studies at the University of Maryland. Giovanni Luca is holds a laureate in computer science from Sapienza University in Rome and a PhD in computer science from the University of Lugano. He's interested in problems originating from the collective interplay between people and computing systems, such as information propagation on social media, knowledge production in online communities, and trustworthiness in cyberspace. His work has been covered in major news outlets, including the Wall Street Journal, Wired, NPR, and CBS News. We're honored today to have an industry expert providing commentary on Giovanni Luca's talk. We have Ben Leff, who is the co-founder and CEO of Verasight. Ben co-founded Verasight in 2020 with his former Cornell Government Professor, Peter K. Enns. Verasight's mission is to expand access to high-quality survey data by building innovative methods to help organizations understand voters and consumers. Verasight's clients include government agencies, academic researchers, Fortune 500 companies, and investors. Ben's recent work has been featured in Bloomberg, Forbes, The Hill, and Los Angeles Times. He began his career at Goldman Sachs and graduated from the Stanford Graduate School of Business as an Arjay Miller Scholar. We're thrilled to have Ben here to comment on Giovanni Luca's recap of the project. Giovanni, the stage is yours.
Perfect. Thank you, Wayne. Thanks for the very nice introduction. And I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. All right. Okay, let me get this out of the way. Perfect. And we should be all set. So, good afternoon, everyone. Well, my name is Giovanni Luca Ciampaglia, that you know. Today I'm going to talk about audience diversity, the socio-algorithmic foundations of trustworthy news recommendation. And this work has been partially supported by the SoDa seed grant. And I want to start by talking about something that perhaps some of you remember from a few years back, the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge. And this is an early meme, I guess, that in many ways exemplifies both the power and the perils of social media. Because if you remember, this was a campaign to raise awareness about Lou Gehrig's disease. And in that case, as soon as the idea was that people would throw a bucket of ice cold water on them, and suddenly celebrities were doing that. Bill Gates was doing it, and they were taking, like, you know, this kind of like challenges with each other. And so as soon as this campaign started spreading, social media were abuzz with it, and Twitter at the time listed the hashtag for Ice Bucket Challenge as one of its trending topics, causing this to boost even more its reach and make it the meme that now we all remember. However, often we do see stories that are amplified by social media that are not, first of all, are not as fun as the Ice Bucket Challenge, but on top of that, they have no factual basis on reality. And yet they're still picked up by social media. And it's in many ways still not completely clear why it happens. This is an example, again, from a few years back when Facebook used to include a product called the Trending Topics news box, which in many ways was a response to this old classic feature of the old Twitter. And at a certain point through the various issues that Facebook had, one of was that they were accused of essentially political bias. So they said, you know what, we're gonna fire all the editors that are curating this trending box, which at the time was actually curated by human reviewers, human experts. And let's just put an algorithm similar to the trending topic algorithm of Twitter to do that. And the very first day, the top trending topic was a fake news story about Fox News host Megyn Kelly saying that she was backing Hillary Clinton. This again is from a couple of electoral cycles ago. And this is a perfect example of how essentially a algorithm left unchecked could be very easily fooled into spreading what now we call misinformation, but in many ways could be described as a utterly completely fake news. And what we know about the spread and the prevalence of social media is that of misinformation and you know all the untrustworthy information that is currently blogging social media, is that in many ways this is a reflection of the fact that social media themselves produce highly polarized environments. And this is something that has been known for quite some time. Back in 2005, Adamic and Glantz were showing this about blogs, where looking at political bloggers, they were seeing how red blogs will link to each other and blue blogs will link to each other. Old Twitter as well had similar patterns of retweet networks, for example. So these are features that are very, very robust of the way the information environment is structured, of the way the information travels, especially news and political information. And of course, when it comes to the news ecosystem, the consumers of information are not just the only players that characterize the various outcomes that we care about. And another important part is, of course, played by sources. And sources, in many ways, is something that in journalism is well known that follow particular patterns where, for example, here I'm showing you a very well-known chart compiled by Adfontes Media, which is again one of these projects dedicated to understanding better and mapping the media ecosystem. And something that is very well known about the structure of at least the US media ecosystem is that essentially there is this kind of inverted U-shape relation between the partisanship of the source. Here Adfontes labels it as bias, and its reliability. The more hyper-partisan the source is, we tend to see sources that tend to follow adhere less to the standards of journalism, of classic things of checking your sources, correcting unreliable content and mistakes and things like that. And in many ways, on top of that, there's of course the role played by platforms, because of course platforms are what both enable these outlets to reach their audiences, but in many ways also steer these sources toward particular policies. And the main way platforms deliver this content is through the use of recommender systems. And right now, in practice, these news feeds are what we all interact with. And there's been already, for quite some time at this point, questions about the role that these recommendation algorithms play in determining exposure to information. A few years ago, the Wall Street Journal was making an example of what the feed of a prototypical liberal would look like versus the one of a prototypical conservative on Facebook, about the same, about the same topic, healthcare. So the feed of a conservative would include sources that talk about healthcare in a way, whereas the feed of a liberal in completely different ways. And in many ways, right now, this connection between these algorithmic choices that are made by the platforms to deliver content to the consumers and the news consumption choices that the news consumers make in accessing information are still not completely well understood. And we're still trying to understand in many ways what are the potential ramifications of the use of this type of technologies. One thing we know is that in many ways, the fact that these algorithms are designed to essentially keep users engaged can be very problematic for news consumers, and in particular partisan news consumers. In an experiment from a few years ago, Schmargard and Clark, for example, asked a group of participants from the United States to rate how much they liked the same set of news, 16 news headlines. And the first thing they noticed is that, of course, the things that the Democrats liked versus those of the Republicans were completely opposite, whereas things that would be were likely to be liked by Democrats were at the top, the same thing would be at the bottom for the Republican. But they went a step further, and then they used these signals that these participants provided to create essentially recommendations and to ask to a new set of participants to engage with information sorted by the popularity of these likes that were collected in the previous stage by the previous group of participants. And they saw that essentially whenever you display a feed that is ranked by popularity in a congenial and consistent way to partisans, that tends to create these feedback loops where information that is sorted at the top, that's ranked highly, is more likely to be engaged with and consumed just by virtue of its position. And so the selection of content here plays this role, this very important role. And in many ways, so the idea is that this creates the potential for feedback loops where an algorithm is fed on a signal that comes from the engagement of participants that, however, are following their attitude consistency when consuming news. So to sum it up, the background here is very clear. We understand the recommender systems, of course, are these algorithms and increasingly these AI-based systems that prioritize content, are optimized to predict engagement, to keep users engaged with the platforms, and they're based on the implicit feedback that they get from the users. This is something that at this point is well known, and it's one of these design principles. And we also know that people have these strong preferences for attitudinal content. So this selective exposure idea is very much plays a very fundamental role. And even recently, in social media, it's been shown that decisions by humans still play a very important role in shaping the type of content people are exposed to. And we also know that when it comes to this low-quality content that includes fake news or misinformation or hyper-partisan content and so on and so forth, tends to generate higher level of engagements when it spreads in like-minded audiences. In taking this together, essentially, there is the potential for these feedback loops between human decisions and algorithmic decisions that can amplify low-quality information without regards for its content. And to give you an example, essentially, of how a recommender system works, let's imagine having three prototypical users: Alice, Bob, and Carol. And Alice and Bob have a particular political orientation that's reflected by the sources that they consume. They look at CNN and The Atlantic. Bob also looks at a website called the National Report, which happens to be a fake news website. Now, Carol, on the opposite, instead, is a conservative, and so this is reflected in the fact that likes information from different outlets. Now, a recommender system will infer on the basis of this information alone that these two users are similar, whereas Alice is dissimilar from Carol. And so when I'm making a recommendation for a new piece of content from a new outlets, the recommender system will simply end up for example, this is the classic collaborative filtering algorithm that we use in one of our studies, to end up recommending something like the low quality information from the national report. How can we prevent this from happening? And in many ways, platforms have been struggling with this because they lack good signals of quality of the content that they need to recommend to users to keep them engaged. And one of possible solution that in my research we've been exploring for some time is the idea that in a certain sense we want to maintain this idea that algorithms should look at the engagement and the signals of engagement that is generated by these audiences of sources. But the thing that so far has been neglected is the fact that these audiences themselves should have particular qualities that will help guide algorithms towards quality content. And one possible solution that we're proposing is that this high engagement that algorithms are looking to as a signal for determining the relevance should apply in an audience that is itself diverse. So instead of looking for content that generates engagement without regard for where it's generated, the algorithm should in particular take into account the fact that it's generated in a diverse audience. And we have studied the properties of audience diversity for some time. And the first question is, can you use audience diversity as a signal of news quality? And this can you actually use this signal then in a recommender system? And to do that, we took clickstream data and combined them with source reliability ratings, first to get a sense of whether there is indeed a correlation between the diversity of an audience and the quality of the information produced by the outlet of the audience. And then we actually went and used this signal to produce better recommendation and did measure whether there was an improvement in trustworthiness. I will talk briefly about this past project, but I would like also to get to this ongoing research that is now being kept me busy for some time, which is if we do know, and in fact, as a spoiler alert, I will tell you that indeed, yes, audience diversity does correlate quite well with quality. What are the effects of prioritizing audience diverse sources on news consumption outcomes? If we merely are able to produce more trustworthy recommendations, will the users also find them useful and engage with them? And to this, that essentially we're designing interventions to estimate the effect of audience diversity of this prioritization choice in the algorithm using counterfactual rankings. This is a bit of. So we're gonna first focus on the first part and to give you a little bit of background. And so to do this study, we looked at data from YouGov that provided web traffic history of a good panel of internet users from the US, and combined this with news reliability ratings by NewsGuard, which is similar to Adfantas, is a company that is specialized in evaluating individual news outlets. And I probably, very briefly, NewsGuard essentially is one of these companies that evaluates websites using a rubric that essentially tries to capture these basic tenets of journalism, like editorial responsibility and accountability, and produces a rating on a 100-point scale where essentially everything that scores above 60% is considered trustworthy. So this is the distribution of the scores in the particular NewsGuard dataset that we used at the time. And as I said, YouGov instead provides a panel of US internet users that consented to collect its anonymized web traffic logs, and provided, in particular for this particular study, also a measure of the self-reported partisanship on a 7-point scale from strong Democrat to strong Republican. We're using data at this point. This first study that we did was from a couple of years ago, so the data at this point are a bit from a few electoral cycles ago. but it covers a large number of page views and a good chunks of domain. So when we combine these two data sets together, the first thing was to recreate that inverted U-shape distribution that the Ad Fontes ratings had, but this time substituting the reliability as estimated by Ad Fontes with the diversity score of a particular outlet. And what we find is that we pretty much recover the same inverted U-shape that Ad Fontes has. But this time, of course, as I said, the variance is the criterion that we're using to score on the y-axis. And we do see that there is this tendency for the two tails of the distribution to be the locations of most of the outlets that have lower NewsGuard scores. So in many ways, this is to say that audience diversity is a good proxy for reliability. And even if you look at trying to compare it with the splitting different news outlets by the different, parties and alignment, you will still see this good correlation. This is not what you get if instead you just look at the popularity of the audiences of these sources. And in many ways, this is again a confirmation of this intuition that looking at popularity alone cannot be a good way to identify good quality content. I'll try to explain quickly how we then use the audience diversity, because we essentially incorporated in we took the standard venerable collaborative filtering, which is based on the idea of looking at the similarity between users to decide what should be rated, and simply include an additional component that now will give a boost in the score that is used for ranking, that is now based on the diversity of the source. So the more diverse the source is, the higher the boost we get. And when we name this, we call this the collaborative filtering plus diversity algorithm. And when we actually went to produce recommendations, the idea is that is our algorithm now able to determine that this is not what should be recommended. And we do find that indeed the recommendations that we're able to produce with CF plus D are indeed more trustworthy on average. Here I'm comparing the trustworthiness, the average score of these ranked lists of different length for the collaborative filtering algorithm and our CF plus D algorithm, plus two additional baselines that came from the data, looking just at the global popularity or the actual visits that the participants made. And you can measure trustworthiness in a number of ways. You can look at the proportion of trustworthy content, these outlets that score high on the NewsGuard rubric, or you can just look at the actual score that NewsGuard gave them. And it seems that the picture is pretty much the same. Qualitatively, we're following the same idea. The other interesting thing is that when we look at the precision of these recommendations, when in other words we ask the recommender to tell us if these recommendations were correct, our CF plus D has a slightly higher rate of error, but still quite comparable with the original CF algorithm. And so in many ways, this tells us that, yes, there is a little bit of a trade-off between improving the trustworthiness and the relevance of these recommendations, but it seems to be worth it in a certain sense. So I've thought about, can we use audience diversity as a signal of quality? And now, of course, the question is the fact that you're able to one is able to produce good recommendation. In many ways, it's a bit like the quest that every parent has, right, of trying to get their kids to eat healthy. You can, of course, put good food, healthy food in front of their kids, but if they're not going to eat it, that's not going to improve the diet of your kids. And this was an example of one of the reviewers of our this previous study mentioned, like, yes, you're producing good recommendation, but is this something that can be actually used in practice to provide recommendations that will be useful to people? And so in many ways, what is the effect on this approach that prioritizes audience diverse sources on news consumption outcomes? And to do this, we're essentially building we built a news platform that allows us to deliver interventions that estimate this effect by means of counterfactual rankings. And this is still very much work in progress. In fact, we've completed piloting our this intervention, this randomized trial just in the last few months, and now we're moving to soft launch. So in many ways, I can show you some preliminary results, but we're still very much waiting to get the final answer on this. But I want to talk a little bit about what it means to design interventions that now are operating on the order and presentation of the newsfeed. In many ways, on these algorithmic decisions that the platforms can make to provide better information to users. And in many ways, if you look at the landscape of the literature that has tried to estimate the causal impact of different interventions aimed at improving news consumption outcomes, there's been a big divide between what are field interventions that typically are, delivered through, for example, browser extensions or through usage of the platform's affordances, like delivering ads to participants with content that helps them discern better between false and true information, for example, or for example, via direct messages. So a lot of these are field interventions in the sense that they reach the participant in the social media platform where they are while they're consuming news, are trying to essentially steer their behavior. And they have access to a realistic inventory of the content that the participant would normally see. And so this means that they have high external validity. And many of the inferences that can be drawn enjoy this from this external validity to be more credible about the type of things that we can do. However, this comes at the expense of having very limited control on the presentation of the information and the overall user experience. The other option is to go for what are more traditional lab experiments. And these are often delivered through survey instruments, or for example, through games. And a lot of, for example, interventions aimed at improving our media literacy have been developed and delivered this way. The opposite is true here of the inventory. Typically, you not having access to the realistic inventory that is circulating on the platform means that researchers are left with having to pre-select this inventory. This leads to low external validity, but at the same time, as the pro of giving to the experimenters almost complete control on the user experience and the order and selection of the information. What we're trying here is to kind of strike a little bit of a middle between these two approaches. And in my lab, we built a platform called Rockwell that essentially enables us to deploy counterfactual rankings. And in this way allows us to tap into the inventory, a realistic inventory provided by a social media platform, but at the same time gives us almost complete control on the user experience. And it's not an algorithmic audit because we do not have access to the actual algorithmic recommendations that, for example, Twitter does. But we do recreate an environment that is very similar to Twitter and allows us to ask questions about these different fundamental design principles of recommender algorithm. And so in many ways, I want to stress it that what we're trying to do here is not really an algorithmic audit. We're not trying to ask questions about whatever Twitter is using these days as a recommender system, but we're more trying to understand what are the possible differences between different ways of ranking information. As I said, right now we're completed the pilot stage and we're starting a soft launch soon. One thing that I wanted to show you is that what this gives us is essentially the ability to observe behavior in a very realistic way. Here I'm giving you a plot of the likelihoods of engagement that people have with content as a function of the dwell time that they spend on a given post. And we see that we observe essentially what is normal behavior on social media. A lot of people will tend to engage with content in a very passive and almost automatic way. Their dwell time is very short. And this is consistent with the fact that a lot of people just use social media in a way to simply signal back that they've seen that they're liking content by their friend. On the other hand, past this almost instinctive way of engaging with content, we see that dwell time, the higher the dwell time, the higher the chances of engagement. And so in many ways, we're having the opportunity here to observe realistic behavior with realistic content, but having the ability to change completely the order of information. And so we can ask questions about whether RCF plus the algorithm will work better than the regular RCF. There's been a lot of research challenges, especially in the last few days, in the last few months, related to trying to carry out a type of research like this. The main one, of course, as you probably imagine, is the fact that the social media landscape is changing a lot. Twitter, in many ways, is not the platform that we used to know in the past. Perhaps the most cataclysmic change that has affected researchers is the fact that the Twitter API, free access to it, is now a thing of the past, and now Twitter charges quite expensive data, quite expensive access for its data. This is in many ways leading people to state that Twitter at this point is essentially a dead platform. It's just on its way out, and it's not anymore. It's definitely losing its influential role that it used to have on the social media ecosystem. And in many ways, this is absolutely true. The Twitter of the past is no more around us. But when it comes to actually studying the impact of algorithms on the exposure to low-quality information, I would argue that actually, in many ways, Twitter is still a very relevant platform and a way to reach populations that are more likely to be exposed to low-quality information. And so, even though right now I think that the old Twitter is gone, what we have now, it's still something that in many ways is still a compelling and relevant platform that we have to contend with when we want to study, in particular, these type of questions. And this also has opened the debate about what is the role and what is the interplay between researchers and platforms. For many years, and in many ways, Twitter has exemplified this, researchers and platforms have been in a relation that has been mutually beneficial for both. Especially Twitter has been always in the news because of studies showing all its interesting properties and so on. And researchers have benefited from free data access and a stable developer ecosystem. But of course, now there are market disincentives for platforms to share their data, especially with the rise of generative AI. And in many ways, that particular set of conditions that created this honeymoon between researchers and platforms are no longer holding. It's possible that the future will still allow for researchers like me and others to still be able to access these ecosystems, for example, via policy and regulation. But at the same time, I think that perhaps as researchers, we should also start to think whether it is in our interest to consider, in many ways, almost running our own platforms, because it is clear that the companies, in many ways, are not always going to be these friendly actors as we always expected them to be. And this is especially compelling because we do need to understand better the role of these platforms. Frances Haugen, the Facebook whistleblower, for example, put it in a very compelling way, saying that if we had access at least to a way to simulate how social media behave, we would at the very least be able to pose questions in a quantitative way and understand better what's their role. In this, I think that the landscape now is interestingly promising. The rise of decentralized social media like Blue Sky and Mastodon, I think, will pose very interesting avenue for exploring the possibilities for creating better infrastructure for the research and understanding of these issues. I will end here. Essentially, we're currently field like newsfeed intervention are gonna be increasingly a way to understand better the properties of this interplay between humans and algorithms. And beyond news consumption, is diversity always beneficial? This is also a question that I think in the future will be more and more interesting to answer. And in general, this idea of can we start to think about ranking in ways that are not purely, about optimizing engagement and this customer experience, but can we think about values to inform ranking, for example, pro-social values or democratic notions that should go into the way these ranking algorithms work. With this, I would like to thank everyone for your attention, and I would like, of course, to acknowledge my fantastic collaborators and the support from the Social Data Science Center and by the NSF. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you, Giovanni, Luca. Really appreciate that. If you do a stop screen share, Ben will queue up his slides. And in the interim, I have a very quick clarifying question from Evan Herring-Nathan, who is really interested in your issue of handling diverse audiences as a way to evaluate news source quality. He was curious on how the demographics of audience members were determined. Was it user-reported data? Were they estimated? Where did you get that to start with?
So yes, for the particular study with on Rockwell, we were using only self-reports about partisanship. We're asking both the party affiliation and their ideology.
Excellent, thank you. And Ben, please, the stage is yours.
Absolutely. Thank you, Wayne, and thank you, Giovanni. I'm excited to dive in. I really want to do just two main objectives. First, I just want to put into context how hard the work is that Giovanni is trying to do in terms of being able to get people to share their information, fighting against the changing social media landscape in terms of what's available for researchers. And then the second, which is related to the question that Wayne just asked, and a lot of Giovanni's work, is how do we get this representative sample or these diverse audiences? And that's really our focus at Verasight. How do we recruit truly diverse audiences to participate in this type of research and opt in to share their information and to participate in these studies? So first, I always like to ground advanced researchers' work in what the status quo is. And, Verasight, I'd say about 75% of our work is sophisticated researchers such as Giovanni, but a lot of our work is Fortune 500 companies. And, everyone on this call is probably used to the traditional way that companies and organizations are collecting data. And it's shockingly antiquated. I mean, I'm sure you've all seen your email inbox, take this survey, share this piece of information, rate us 1 through 10. And it really has to make you wonder, first, who is participating in this? We're all very busy. The odds of answering any one of these questions is really low. And so you are not going to get a representative or diverse sample. And then second, what are the decisions being made based off this information? And so I just want to ground that as just the level that Giovanni and this lab is able to take this a step further in terms of traditional forms of data collection. The second aspect of this being extremely difficult, and Giovanni already touched on some of the changing platforms and APIs and how social media sites are getting tougher, but there's also just a broader push against passive data collection. And it's grounded in probably a smart reality that there are a lot of bad actors out there who are probably not using people's information for good purposes. There are plenty of examples of that. And if we look at where the world is moving in terms of privacy regulation. The push of a button on my iPhone can disable data sharing. And then, a lot of the prior research has been grounded in people's browsing history, which often relates to their cookies, which is looking at, previous websites they visited. And the concept of a cookie is rapidly disappearing. And so, even repeating or replicating some of the studies of the last few years is going to be immensely challenging in the future. So this is really at the core of the issue that we're trying to solve at Verasight. And one thing that Giovanni mentioned that I just want to build upon is, what if researchers build sort of their own platforms? And so in many respects, that's what we're doing at Verasight, or we're doing the early innings of it. Where what we're doing is we're creating a platform where Americans can sign up and participate in surveys or participate in sharing their data and information. And, here's just a brief interface of the platform. But one thing we found particularly compelling, particularly with younger generations, is how do we let people take ownership of their data and actually monetize their data and their survey responses? I think there's a growing recognition that people's information is valuable, so they shouldn't be sharing it for free. So one of the technologies that we built at Verasight is, if you take a survey or you participate in research, you can instantly redeem a Venmo incentive. And there's a link at the end for you all to sign up. I'm obviously selfishly recruiting everyone on this call, but it also, I think, gets at really the heart of, can we create this exchange where people are open to sharing their information with researchers and participating in survey research. So what I then want to dive into is, how do we recruit people for the Verasight community? And why that's so important is because it gets at this concept of, do we have a representative sample? Do we have a diverse audience, people of all political backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds, racial backgrounds? And that's really the most significant challenge for at least what we do at Verasight, and also in terms of being able to apply research more broadly and know, are these conclusions going to hold in the real world? So what we do at Verasight is take a multi-mode recruitment approach to getting people in the Verasight community. And just a few examples of what we do. Some of our recruitment involves pure random address-based sampling. So I don't know if anyone's gotten a survey invitation in the mail ever, but the way this works is, you get an envelope, there might be a dollar bill in the envelope. It says, scan this QR code, go to this website link, potentially call into this number and participate in survey research. Why that's beneficial is that everyone has an equal chance of being selected to participate in this research. We have access to the master post office file, so it's essentially picking names out of a hat of who we're going to invite to Verasight. Another way that we recruit people is really through targeted text messages and emails. And so text message has become a pretty growing recruitment approach, growing in popularity. If you think of survey research 20 or 30 years ago, most of it was still on the telephone. So, people would get a call, tended to be after dinner. There were only, 50 years ago, there were only a few things on television, so it was very easy to get people to participate in survey research. We think a lot of the next iteration, younger generations have an unwillingness to participate in phone calls, so we're texting them and asking them to join the Verasight community. And then the last way, which also relates to a lot of Giovanni's work, and we've currently working on this with him, is how can we do what we call dynamic online sampling, which is using what we can learn about people's social media profiles and intercepting them with targeting ads. So, a lot of what Giovanni showed are these clusters of people who behave similarly. What we find is social media platforms are willing to give you those groups of people if you're an advertiser, because it's going to help you sell more. So, for example, there's a group of people who behave like dog owners and you're selling pet food, social media company is going to make it easy for you to target that specific group. Now, this is more complicated than pet owners, but there are behaviors that are correlated with likely Republicans, likely Democrats. And so we can use that information to create really targeted ads in terms of recruiting these people to participate in research. And ultimately, what we found is that the way to get the most diverse participation in this type of research is through these multi-mode recruitment mechanisms. As you can imagine, certain groups are more likely to be recruited through certain means. So for example, one thing we found in our research, mail recruitment works well for people who are very trustworthy of authority. It's an official looking mailer. They see client list, an academic institution. But then there are also folks who are quite distrustworthy of authority. And so they're more likely to be incentivized to click on a social media ad that says, earn a few bucks for taking a survey or participating in research. And ultimately, what our data science team is trying to figure out is what is that optimal combination to get the most diverse and representative sample for Giovanni's research and for our other clients. And, just what we found is through this, we replicated a study that Pew did looking at different sample providers, and the Verasight sample had the lowest mean absolute error. And a few of the reasons why we think that's the case. First, it's what I just mentioned in terms of having diverse recruitment approaches and trying to figure out what is the optimal way to get each type of individual. And then the second is understanding how do we incentivize the next generation of survey takers and make them feel like their data and information is valuable and worth sharing. And so, we spend a lot of time figuring out, building the technology for instant PayPal, Venmo incentives, or be it an Amazon or Walmart gift card, or if you're it's important to get high income folks where $5 gift card isn't going to move the needle. And so there's an option for a charitable donation, for instance. And so combining diverse recruitment with understanding participant behavior and how to incentivize them is really our thesis of what leads to the lowest absolute error in our work. And there's a diverse group of people on this call, and I want to emphasize how valuable this work is really for broad use cases and implications. A lot of Giovanni's work focuses on the political use cases, but I'd say one of the more surprising aspects of starting a business is really understanding the different use cases of survey research. So everything from exactly what we're talking about on this call to a fair bit of our work is with investment firms who are going to make multi-$100-million investment decisions of whether to buy a company and are trying to understand, how loyal are consumers to this product? Are they likely to be receptive to price changes or to certain marketing messages? And I say this because everyone on this call and in these classes is learning a super valuable skill set for whatever you end up doing down the road. All of this research is super relevant to broad-based applications. And lastly, so I wrap up right in time for Q&A. If you wanna see what it's like to participate in this type of research, here's a link to sign up for Verasight. I don't think any of Giovanni's studies are available at the moment, but it'll give you a good sense of how we think the next evolution of research will look like. And certainly email me your feedback as well, because we have a team of developers who are eager to continue to build what they think are the tools to set up what Giovanni described as the ability for researchers to run their own platforms. If we can recruit people and entice people to participate in these platforms, then it really expands the research horizon. So with that, I will wrap up, and Wayne, turn it back over to you for Q&A.
Hey, great, Ben. I do appreciate that. It is critically important to understand the infrastructure that enables all of this research to happen, and sampling is at the heart of that. So thank you for that really valuable walkthrough and introducing all of us to Verasight. Please send your questions using the Q&A feature. I wanted to highlight that Mohammed Salama put a couple of questions in, and Giovanni Luca had a chance to respond to a couple of them. I wanted to hit at a high level. One of those questions was, how do you evaluate quality in this? And he had mentioned they use the NewsGuard system, which evaluates the source. And then there's a question on how this works across platform. Giovanni, would you like to talk about kind of the text base that you use that allows this to be universally applicable?
Yeah, right now, the particular approach we're using is makes use of the text because it's based on tweets. In the particular experiment that we're using, as I said, we're looking to re-rank the content of individual sources. And that's why we chose to use NewsGuard, because we provide ratings at the source level. That said, one could extend this approach in ways that account for data that are not necessarily textual, and could even try to include quality ratings that are at the content, at the level of the individual content. These are, of course, all interesting questions that I'm sure in the computer science and people that work on recommender systems would be interesting in pursuing.
Excellent. And that ends with a question of, you're doing all of this work to try and shift our understanding of getting news from reputable sources and hearing differing opinions. So how do you think this arc, as it plays out over time, is going to be effective at resolving these issues of echo chambers and filter bubbles? I know that's the goal. How much hope do you have?
Well, yes, it's in a way it is the goal, but I'm afraid that like the echo chamber, the filter bubble is really something that in many ways will never go away, because it's us. We have these platitudinal preferences, and I think everyone tries to work on themselves to become better news consumers, but these are in many ways are innate processes, and oftentimes we are even conscious of them. And past research has shown that even that particular signal coming from the human decisions themselves is still unbeatable in many ways. What I think this research highlights is this idea that, however, the choices of consumers are not the only choices being made. The platforms are deploying these algorithms that are making these content choices, and in many ways are also shaping the overall ecosystem. For example, news sources see that by publishing particular content that's more appealing to those partisan preferences, they will get more exposure. And in many ways, this is what we're going to change. We want to change. We want to change this balance that currently is essentially giving to platforms this ability to deliver content in a very good way, in impressive, at scales that have never been possible before, but at the same time always end up being trapped into these feedback loops that end up rewarding these partisan sources.
Very fine. We have a general question that probably everyone on the call is asking from an anonymous attendee, which is so we're seeing the news sources with partisanship across the entire curve that you started the talk off with. Just practically, what is the best way you'd recommend that we should currently be consuming our news?
So as an individual consumer, I would say that trying to get your news from a broad range, across the aisle is always a good idea, because in many ways, if we want to be responsible and critical consumers, we need to hear from both sides of the spectrum. This is, of course, however, very hard to do. And in many ways, as I said, our default mode is to not really do that. And so recommender systems in many ways have been these kind of invisible helpers that have helped in follow our innate tendencies towards congenial information. But yes, if I were to kind of try to also nurture better news consumers, I would tell them to look for more diverse and cross-cutting information.
Very fine. A question over to Ben. So Given how important it is to get the right samples for this level of work at scale, right, what Verasight is doing is tremendously useful for researchers that are interested in potentially using this service. How do you differentiate yourself from standard research panels we get for surveys?
Yeah, excellent question. Really, probably two main ways that we differentiate ourselves. First is just how we recruit respondents. So a lot of traditional panels tended to recruit respondents in really one main mode, whether it's just online recruitment. Traditionally, it was just telephone recruitment. And so a lot of our thesis is to have the highest quality panel. You really want to recruit respondents in multiple modes and figure out what is the optimal way to get each of those respondents. So it's really our main differentiator in terms of recruiting respondents in the multitude of methods. Second is related to respondent verification. And so one of the surprising things is often you think you're working with the panel, and then they're actually not a panel. They're just going elsewhere for data. So I used to think Qualtrics was a panel. It's not the case. It's software. But if you go to Qualtrics for survey respondents, they're going to potentially hundreds of different vendors for those responses. So a big benefit of what we're doing is recruiting every respondent directly, verifying them as a unique human, matching them to voter files, getting their active opt-in consent, and that just broadens the horizon of what's possible to do when you have that direct one-to-one relationship with the research participant.
And the ability of having people to own their data, monetize their data, and control their data is very timely and appropriate. Do you ever link people who provide data with the study results? So for example, would panelists with you ever get pointers to Giovanni's papers?
We've experimented it, and absolutely, there's certainly an interest in people seeing the end result. News stories is very interesting, and it's absolutely right, because to some participants that's more meaningful than the monetary incentive. And so, it's important you're appealing to the different kinds of reasons people are participating.
Excellent. Opportunity for a last question from the audience. You've asked some really good ones here. In the meantime, we'll ask our final slide to be brought up. And great, we'll go ahead and thank both Giovanni, Luca, and Ben for an engaging session. This is part of our SoDa Seed Grant series. These are researchers that have presented interesting and provocative ideas to the center, and we provided some modest funds to allow them to develop this in new directions, to be able to secure additional funds in the future as SoDa is kind of working its way across the disciplines, colleges, departments, and programs on campus. So we're really thrilled to have this representation here, and thank you again for the talk. Reminder, our next talk coming up will be on Tuesday, April the 9th. This will be back to our regular time slot of 12 to 1 o'clock. We look forward to seeing you there. Thank you all.